I almost ignored the call. It was after midnight and my house was quiet and my husband was asleep beside me, safe, familiar, trusted. When my son's teacher whispered my name instead of greeting me, my stomach dropped. She wasn't calling as an educator. She was calling as someone who was afraid of my husband. She said she recognized him under a different name while secretly tutoring a troubled student after school, and that one detail cracked my life in half. Because as she spoke, I realized the man I married hadn't just lied to me, he had chosen us. And once you understand why, there's no unknowing it. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. Midnight had already passed, that strange hour when everything feels suspended, like the world is holding its breath. My husband was asleep beside me, his back turned, breathing slow and even. One arm was flung across the empty space between us, familiar, reassuring. I was just drifting off when my phone vibrated against the nightstand. Once. Then again. I stared at the screen without picking it up. No name, just an unknown number. My first thought was annoyance. My second was fear. No one calls after midnight unless something is wrong, or someone is drunk, or someone is about to change your life without asking permission. I silenced it. The vibration stopped, and I exhaled, my heart still thudding too fast for a house this calm. I told myself it was nothing, a wrong number, a telemarketer glitch, someone else's emergency, not mine. I turned toward my husband, watching his chest rise and fall, grounding myself in the normalcy of it. Then the phone vibrated again. This time it felt louder, insistent, like it knew I was pretending not to notice. I picked it up and stepped quietly into the hallway before answering. "Hello," I whispered, already annoyed at myself for caring. There was a pause on the other end. Then a woman breathed my name like she was afraid someone might hear her say it. "Please don't hang up." My stomach tightened. I recognized her voice then, my son's teacher. Calm, organized, the kind of woman who sent thoughtful emails and always smiled during pickup. She had never sounded like this, ever. "Is my son okay?" I asked, the question coming out sharper than I meant it to. Yes, he's fine," she said quickly. "This isn't about him, not directly. I didn't know who else to call." I leaned against the wall, suddenly cold. "Then what is this about?" Another pause. I could hear her breathing, uneven, like she was working up the courage to jump off a cliff. "I can't talk long, and I can't say everything over the phone, but you need to listen to me very carefully." I glanced back toward the bedroom, toward the closed door, toward the man I shared a life with. "You're scaring me." "I know. I'm scared too." The words settled into my chest like a weight. Then she said it, quietly, carefully, like she was placing a fragile object into my hands. "Your husband goes by another name." The hallway seemed to tilt. For a moment, I couldn't feel my feet on the floor. "I'm sorry, what?" I laughed softly, despite myself. "That's not possible." I thought the same thing, until I recognized him. My mouth went dry. Recognized him where? "I can't explain yet. I just need you to know this before anything else, before you talk to him, before you trust what he says." Silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. "I wouldn't be calling you at midnight if I wasn't sure, and I wouldn't be risking my job if I wasn't afraid." Afraid of what? I wanted to ask. Afraid of who? But before I could form the words, she whispered, "I think your husband chose your family on purpose." And that was when the dread truly set in, heavy, nauseating, and irreversible. Before that call, my life had a rhythm so steady I barely noticed it anymore. Mornings were rushed but predictable. Burnt toast, missing socks, my son complaining about math while my husband tied his shoes with practiced patience. Evenings were softer. Homework at the kitchen table, dinner plates stacked in the sink, the quiet comfort of knowing exactly what came next. My husband was the constant in all of it, dependable, present, the man who remembered spirit days at school and volunteered to chaperone field trips when other parents made excuses. He kissed my forehead before work, texted me when he was running late, and always asked our son about his day like the answer genuinely mattered. If someone had asked me to describe him an hour before that call, I would have said safe. That word would have come easily. Our son's school felt just as secure. Small classrooms, familiar faces, teachers who stayed long after the bell rang. His teacher, the same woman who had just called me shaking, was one of the reasons I never worried. She was respected, careful, the kind of teacher other parents trusted with their children without question. She didn't gossip, she didn't dramatize, she documented everything. Which is why her voice, cracked and urgent, didn't fit into the life I knew. Nothing about my world made room for midnight warnings or hidden names. We were the family people nodded at during pickup, the ones who showed up on time, paid dues early, hosted birthday parties in the backyard. There were no locked doors in our house, no secrets that required whispering. At least none that I knew of. I leaned against the hallway wall, trying to anchor myself in those facts while her words replayed in my head. Your husband goes by another name. I pictured him as I'd last seen him, slouched in bed, one sock kicked off, completely unaware that something had shifted. He looked like a man with nothing to hide, like someone whose worst crime might be forgetting trash day. So why did my hands feel unsteady? I told myself the teacher had to be mistaken. People looked alike, names got confused, stress made people see patterns that weren't there. She admitted she was scared. Fear distorts reality. That explanation fit my life better than the alternative. The alternative didn't fit at all. Because if she was right, then the safety I wrapped around my son every night was paper thin, and the man I trusted most wasn't just flawed, he was unknown. I thought about all the times I'd handed my son off at school without a second glance, about how easily I'd accepted the version of my husband the world saw, about how impossible it felt that danger could exist inside something so ordinary. That's what made the call unbearable. It wasn't the accusation, it wasn't even the mystery. It was the way it threatened to turn my normal life into something staged, like I'd been living on a set, repeating lines, believing in props, while something real and dangerous waited just outside the frame. When I finally spoke again, my voice barely sounded like my own. "You have the wrong person," I said. "You have to." There was no hesitation on the other end this time. I wish I did, because if I'm right, then nothing about tonight is an accident. And in that moment, standing in my quiet hallway, I understood the true terror of what she was telling me. Not that my life was in danger, but that it had been carefully designed to look safe. She didn't recognize him at first. That was the part she kept repeating, like she needed me to understand she wasn't careless, that she hadn't jumped to conclusions in the dark. "It happened slowly," she said. "So slowly I didn't notice until it was already wrong." She told me about the student first, a quiet boy who stayed after school more than anyone realized. His grades had slipped. His behavior hadn't been disruptive enough to trigger alarms, just withdrawn enough to worry her. He lingered when other kids rushed out to waiting cars, asked questions that weren't really about homework, questions about trust, about adults. She'd started tutoring him after hours because no one else would, because that's who she was. Then a few weeks in, someone began volunteering to help. A parent, friendly, engaged. He said he had flexible hours and liked giving back. He showed up with snacks, joked easily with the kids, praised the teacher for her dedication, the kind of man schools welcomed without hesitation. At first, she said, he was just helpful. She described him like she was describing a ghost, half-formed, not quite solid yet. He never stayed too close, never crossed lines that could be pointed to. He listened more than he spoke. When he did talk, it was calm, warm, reassuring. I didn't interrupt, but my chest felt tight because I could already see him, the way my husband leaned against door frames, the way people trusted him instantly, the way he made himself useful without being asked. He didn't use his real name, she continued, or at least not the name you know. I swallowed. Did he say why? He said he preferred nicknames, that it felt more personal. Personal. The word scraped against me. She said weeks passed before anything felt off, nothing dramatic, just a feeling she couldn't explain. The troubled student began to relax around him in a way that worried her, too dependent, too eager to please. And then there was the voice. It was one afternoon, she said. The building was almost empty. I was packing up and he was talking to the boy across the room. I wasn't really listening. until I did. Her voice dropped as if reliving the moment required darkness. "He laughed," she said, "not loudly, just enough. And suddenly I heard him clearly, the cadence, the way he stretched certain words, the way his voice softened when he wanted someone to feel safe." I closed my eyes, because I knew that voice. "I'd heard it before," she whispered. "Years ago, different place, different name, same voice." My heart started racing. "But voices can sound alike," I said, clinging to logic. "People change." "I told myself that," she replied, "for days." She described going home and digging through old emails, searching memories she'd tried to forget, finding notes she'd written to herself, names, descriptions, warnings, and one detail she couldn't ignore. "He always made himself indispensable," she said. "That's how I knew." She hadn't confronted him. She didn't have proof yet, just recognition without evidence, a feeling sharp enough to cut, but not enough to accuse. "I prayed I was wrong," she said. "I wanted to be wrong." My throat burned. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I'm calling you because I recognized him again tonight, and this time he was standing too close to a child who trusts him." The house felt smaller around me, every sound amplified. A floorboard creaked behind the bedroom door, and my breath caught. She hadn't recognized him at first, and somehow that terrified me more than if she had. There was a moment after she finished speaking when neither of us said anything. The silence felt intentional, like she was giving me time to prepare for what came next. Or maybe she was preparing herself. "I didn't want to say his name unless you asked," she finally said. My heart was already pounding too hard. "Say it." She hesitated, then spoke slowly, carefully. "He introduced himself as Marcus." The name landed wrong, not because it was shocking, but because it wasn't unfamiliar. My stomach rolled, sharp and sudden, and I had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself. The hallway light felt too bright. My skin prickled as if something cold had brushed past me. That's not his name," I said automatically, though my voice sounded thin, rehearsed. "I know," she replied. "That's why I remember it." Marcus. The name echoed, stirring something just out of reach, a fragment, a conversation I couldn't quite place. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the memory forward, and suddenly I saw it. Years ago, early in our marriage, a casual moment I dismissed at the time. We were at a neighborhood barbecue. Someone he didn't recognize called out to him from across the yard, smiling like an old friend. "Hey, Marcus!" I remembered laughing about it later, teasing him. He'd shrugged, said people mixed him up with someone else all the time, said it must have been a mistake. I'd believed him. My pulse thudded in my ears. "He's never used that name with me," I said, though it sounded more like a plea than a statement. "He wouldn't," she replied softly, "not if he needed to." Need to. The word cracked something open in me. My husband didn't need a different name, not in the life we shared, not at school events or parent meetings or dinner at our table, which meant that name belonged to a different version of him, one I had never met. My mouth felt dry. "How sure are you?" I asked. She wrote it down, years ago, after the first time, because something about him scared me enough to make notes. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like it was pulling me toward a truth I wasn't ready to carry. Marcus. It wasn't proof, I knew that. Names could be borrowed, coincidences existed, but the certainty in her voice didn't allow for easy explanations. "Why tell me now?" I whispered. "Because he's back, and because this time he's not hiding behind distance, he's hiding behind a family." I thought of our wedding photos, of the way he'd looked at me when we exchanged vows, steady, sincere, proud. I thought of how carefully he'd built a life that made sense. 2 names, 2 identities, 1 man. "I don't know who he is anymore," I admitted, the words breaking free before I could stop them. "That's exactly how it starts," she said gently, "the moment you realize the person you trust has been fractured all along." I stared at the darkened bedroom door, at the space where my husband slept unaware, and felt the first true split inside me between the man I loved and the stranger named Marcus. She didn't tell me the child's name, not at first, and when I realized she was avoiding it on purpose, I understood why. Naming him would make him real in a way neither of us was ready for. "He's the kind of student people overlook," she said. "Quiet, polite, never causes trouble." I pictured my son's classroom, rows of desks, backpacks hanging off chairs, the loud kids who demanded attention, and the silent ones who slipped through unnoticed, the ones teachers worried about after the noise died down. "He started staying late because he didn't want to go home right away," she continued. "Said it helped him focus, said it was easier." Easier than what, she didn't say. She didn't have to. The tutoring sessions were never advertised, no emails to parents, no sign-up sheets, just a quiet arrangement made out of concern. She said she kept it discreet to protect the child's dignity, to avoid labeling him. That discretion, the kindness of it, made my chest ache, and then it made me angry. "That's when your husband offered to help," she said. The words landed with a weight I wasn't prepared for. Offered. Help. I closed my eyes, memories rising uninvited. My husband mentioning after-school programs, saying he admired teachers who went the extra mile, asking questions about which kids struggled most, his tone casual, interested but not intrusive. I thought it was compassion. "He said he knew what it was like to feel invisible," she went on, "that he'd had mentors who changed his life, that sometimes all it took was one adult paying attention." My throat tightened. He'd said those same words at our dinner table once, almost verbatim. I remembered nodding, proud of his empathy. "He never pushed," she said, "never asked to be alone with a child. That's why it took so long to see the pattern." Pattern. She described how he always positioned himself just close enough, how he remembered small details about the student's interests, fears, routines, how the child's mood lifted on days he showed up and crashed on days he didn't. "He made himself essential," she said quietly. I stared at my hands, suddenly unsure what they belonged to. "Did anyone else notice?" I asked. "People noticed he was kind," she replied. "That's the problem." My husband's interest in helping had never seemed unusual. He volunteered at food drives, fixed neighbors' fences, donated to causes without telling anyone. He wore helpfulness like armor. But now the memories rearranged themselves. His insistence on picking up our son sometimes, even when I said I could. His curiosity about school schedules, the way he remembered the names of children who weren't ours. He knew which kids wouldn't be missed right away, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt sick. She wasn't accusing him of something concrete, not yet. She was describing a shape, an outline that looked disturbingly familiar. "This student," she said, "he's the reason I started paying attention, because once you see how carefully someone chooses to help, you start asking why." I thought of all the times I'd praised my husband for being generous, for caring, for stepping in when others didn't. The pattern was forming now, slowly, horribly clear, and I realized the most dangerous thing about my husband wasn't what he did, it was how invisible it looked while he was doing it. After I hung up the phone, I didn't go back to bed. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, replaying years of moments I had never questioned. At the time, they'd seemed too small to matter, harmless. Now they lined up like evidence I had willingly overlooked. There were the schedule changes. His job had always been flexible. That was one of the things I admired about it. Some days he came home early, other days late. He'd explain it with a shrug. Meetings ran long, someone needed help, traffic was bad. I never checked. Why would I? Trust made explanations unnecessary. Then there were the unexplained absences, the afternoons when he said he'd step out for a bit and returned hours later with no story worth remembering. The weekends he volunteered unexpectedly, announcing it like a surprise gift to the world. I'd smiled, told friends how lucky I was to have such a selfless partner. I thought of one particular afternoon years ago when I'd called his phone and it went straight to voicemail. No message, no call back for hours. When he finally returned, he'd apologized quickly and changed the subject. I remember feeling a flicker of irritation and then dismissing it. Everyone deserved privacy. Everyone deserved space. That was my favorite excuse. I'd rationalized everything. His curiosity about my son's school schedule, he was involved. His eagerness to attend parent-teacher meetings, he cared. His insistence on being present, he was devoted. Each time doubt surfaced, I smothered it with logic, with love, with the belief that suspicion was a flaw, not a warning sign. Now, sitting alone, I felt the weight of those decisions pressing into my chest. The guilt came fast and sharp, like I'd failed some unspoken test. How many times had I chosen comfort over curiosity? I remembered a conversation from months earlier. He'd mentioned a student who needed extra support. I hadn't asked how he knew. I'd nodded, half listening, already thinking about dinner plans. The moment passed, sealed by my indifference. I pressed my palms flat against the table, grounding myself as the memories kept coming, each one harmless on its own, each one damning in sequence. The worst part wasn't that he might have lied, it was that I'd made it easy. I'd built a life where questions felt unnecessary, where asking for explanations felt like betrayal, where love meant not looking too closely. And now, the thought that kept looping through my mind made my stomach twist. If I had asked sooner, if I had noticed sooner, would tonight still be happening? The guilt settled into something heavier than fear, because fear could be blamed on him, but guilt had nowhere to go except inward. I wasn't just afraid of who my husband might be. I was afraid of how carefully I'd helped him stay hidden. By the time the sun began to hint at the edges of the sky, I understood something I couldn't unlearn. The lies that destroy lives are rarely big enough to be caught early. They survive because people like me learn how to ignore them. And I had been very, very good at that. She called me again just before dawn, her voice lower this time, steadier but heavier, like someone who had crossed a line she could never step back over. "I didn't want to be right," she said. "I tried very hard not to be." She told me what she'd done after recognizing his voice, how she'd gone home and opened a folder she hadn't touched in years, old emails, archived messages, notes she'd written to herself during a time she thought she'd left behind. "I kept everything," she admitted, "not because I planned to use it, because I was afraid I'd forget." She described photos first, blurry images taken at school events long ago, faces caught at awkward angles, a man standing just out of frame, a familiar posture, a hand resting lightly on a child's shoulder. Nothing criminal, nothing obvious, just enough to make her uneasy now that she was looking again. "I compared them," she said, "side by side." My stomach clenched as she spoke. I pictured her sitting alone, scrolling back and forth, hoping differences would appear, hoping time had changed him enough to make recognition impossible. "It wasn't his face that convinced me," she said. "Faces change, hair changes, weight changes." "What did?" I asked. "The way he stood," she replied, "the way he leaned in when he wanted someone to trust him, the same posture years apart." She told me about the emails next, messages exchanged between staff members back then, careful, cautious language, concerns that were never written plainly, words like uncomfortable and unusual involvement, warnings that danced around accusations without ever naming them. "He disappeared before anything could be proven," she said, "changed districts, changed names." Changed lives, I thought. She said she tried to convince herself that this was different, that people grew, that the past didn't define the present. But when she saw him again under a new name in a new school doing the same things, it shattered her denial. "I knew then," she said, "because patterns don't repeat by accident." I felt dizzy, like the floor was shifting under me. "If you're this sure," I whispered, "why didn't you call the police?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I don't have enough," she said finally, "and because once you involve them, you can't protect the children the way you think you can." Her honesty scared me more than any accusation. She explained how investigations moved slowly, how accusations without concrete proof could backfire, how the wrong step could tip him off. "And because," she added, "you deserve to know first." The weight of that settled on me. Her trust, her fear, her decision to call me instead of making a report she wasn't sure would hold. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "terrified that if I'm wrong, I've destroyed a family, and terrified that if I'm right and I stay quiet, I'll never forgive myself." Confirmation without confrontation, proof without permission. She wasn't asking me to act. She wasn't telling me what to do. She was handing me the truth as carefully as she could and letting me decide how to survive it. "I wish I could give you certainty," she said softly. I looked toward the hallway where my husband would wake soon, unaware that his past was unraveling. "You already have," I replied. When the call ended, the house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you're aware of every small sound, pipes settling, the soft tick of the clock, my own uneven breathing. I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, unsure where to put myself now that nothing felt safe. I walked back into the bedroom slowly, like I was entering a stranger's space. He was asleep exactly how I'd left him, one arm bent awkwardly under the pillow, mouth slightly open, a faint line between his brows that always appeared when he was tired. The sight of him hit me harder than the call had. This was the man who held me when I cried, who knew how I took my coffee, who whispered jokes during boring meetings just to make me smile. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched his chest rise and fall. How could someone capable of this softness also be capable of what she was implying? My mind split itself in two, arguing in whispers. One side clung to the life we'd built, the birthdays, the routines, the shared jokes that didn't need explaining. The other side replayed her words over and over until they lost all ambiguity. Two names, patterns, children. I searched his face for something, anything that looked out of place, a twitch, a shadow, some sign that the man sleeping beside me wasn't who I thought he was. But there was nothing, just peace. That was the most terrifying part. I imagined waking him, demanding answers, shaking him until the truth fell out. I imagined him looking confused, hurt, offended. I imagined him laughing gently, telling me it was all a mistake, and I imagined believing him. The thought made my stomach twist, because if he denied it convincingly enough, I wasn't sure I'd be strong enough to keep doubting. Love is a powerful anesthetic. It dulls the sharpest instincts. I reached out without thinking, then stopped myself inches from his shoulder. Touch felt dangerous now, intimate in a way I couldn't afford. Monster or spouse, stranger or father, I couldn't hold both images at once, so my mind froze between them, unable to choose. If I was wrong, I would be betraying the man I loved. If I was right, I was sitting beside someone who had built a life on deception, and I had slept next to him for years. The weight of that possibility settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't cry, I couldn't move, I just sat there, watching him breathe, feeling like the smallest movement might shatter something beyond repair. Eventually, I lay back down beside him, careful not to wake him. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned, listening to his steady breaths, wondering how someone could look so harmless while everything inside me screamed that nothing was. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't even sleep. When the sky began to lighten, I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could and closed the bathroom door behind me. I stared at my reflection for a long moment, trying to recognize the woman looking back. She looked the same, but she wasn't. Something had shifted permanently, and I could feel it humming under my skin. I waited until he left for work. The moment the door clicked shut, the house felt different. No longer shared, no longer neutral. I moved with purpose then, my fear sharpening into focus. If I was going to look, I had to do it carefully. No alerts, no changes he'd notice, no noise. I started with the obvious, the file cabinet in the hallway closet. Insurance papers, old tax returns, marriage documents, everything exactly where it should be. Too clean, too curated. He'd always been organized, proud of it even, but now I wondered if that order was intentional in a way I'd never questioned. I took pictures of everything with my phone, just in case. Next came the computer. His laptop was password protected, but I knew it. I always had. That knowledge made my chest ache. Another intimacy turned into a liability. I opened the browser and froze. No history. Not recently cleared. Completely gone. My pulse spiked. People deleted histories for reasons. Privacy, work, innocent reasons, but the emptiness felt deliberate, like a room scrubbed too thoroughly after something bad happened. I checked saved passwords, emails under his name, nothing unusual. Then I noticed the drop-down arrow. More accounts, some inactive, some with usernames that weren't his full name, initials, nicknames, variations I'd never seen him use with me. One of them stopped me cold. Marcus. I didn't open it, not yet. Just seeing the name there felt like confirmation and betrayal wrapped together. My hand shook as I moved on, afraid that one wrong click would expose what I was doing. Social media was next. His profiles were sparse, always had been. I don't like putting my life online, he'd said. I'd admired that too. Now I searched deeper. Old tags, cached pages, mentions that hadn't been fully erased. There were gaps, years where he seemed to vanish digitally. No photos, no check-ins, no comments, just silence. People don't disappear like that unless they want to. I found an old LinkedIn profile under a shortened version of his name, different job titles, overlapping timelines that didn't quite make sense, a volunteer role listed at a youth outreach program that no longer existed. When I clicked the link, it led nowhere, deleted. My breath came shallow now, my mind racing ahead of my hands. I searched the program separately, found a news article buried deep in the results. The headline was vague, carefully worded. It mentioned restructuring, staff changes, no details, but the comments were disabled. I sat back in the chair, heart pounding, and stared at the screen. The puzzle pieces were scattered everywhere now, not enough to accuse, too much to ignore. Name variations, deleted histories, gaps that lined up too neatly to be coincidence. This wasn't proof of a crime, it was proof of intention. I closed everything exactly how I'd found it, cleared nothing, changed nothing, left no trace of my search. Then I sat there in the quiet house, hands folded in my lap, realizing that whatever my husband had done or was doing, he had spent years preparing for someone like me not to notice, and I had almost proven him right. I called her again the next evening, unable to stop the questions from clawing through my mind. My voice was quieter this time, more controlled, but every word I asked felt like I was giving myself permission to see the truth. She didn't hesitate. "It's not about you," she said immediately. "It's about proximity, access, opportunity, patterns." I frowned. "Patterns?" She sighed. "It's how he's always chosen families, children who don't draw attention, parents who trust easily, environments where he can be close without raising alarms. That's why your son fits perfectly. He's exactly the type of child he's interested in." The words slammed into me. My son. My little boy, so full of laughter and trust. I thought I was protecting him, raising him in safety. I realized now that he was targetable. She explained that the students he gravitated toward in the past were never the troublemakers or the loud ones. They were quiet, overlooked, children who would let him slip in unnoticed, children whose families assumed he had the best intentions. Over time, he had built a method. He didn't need to force trust. He simply embedded himself where it was easiest, where suspicion wouldn't come naturally. And now, she said, he had done it again, with me, with my son. I felt my chest tighten as the truth began to crystallize. The dinners, the volunteering, the consistent presence, they weren't just acts of kindness, they were camouflage. Every handshake, every school meeting, every helpful gesture had been carefully calculated to make me see him as reliable, trustworthy, perfect, safe. "He chose you," she said softly, "because you'd never question him, because you'd never see it coming. Families like yours are his shield." I felt sick. My hands gripped the edge of the table as nausea spread through me. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw the phone across the room, but none of that would change the reality she had just laid there. He hadn't stumbled into our lives by chance. Every step had been deliberate. Every smile, every reassurance, every quiet moment where I had let my guard down, it had been designed to lull me into believing in a family I thought was ours. "And he's careful," she added, almost as if reading my thoughts. "He doesn't rush. He waits until trust is absolute, until you would never imagine questioning him, until your child fits the pattern without resistance." The word pattern echoed in my head. Marcus, the photo she had described, the gaps in his past, everything lined up. It was more than a betrayal. It was a strategy. My stomach twisted at the realization that the man I'd shared years of my life with had been planning this all along. Not a fleeting mistake, not an affair, not a lapse. A full, calculated choice. He hadn't just chosen me, he had chosen my son. I pressed my forehead into my hands, trying to push back the images her words had conjured. Birthday parties, school recitals, quiet bedtime routines. All of it now felt tainted by the weight of intention. And the worst part, the part that made the nausea and fear rise into a cold, choking panic, was that it had worked. I had trusted him completely. I had fallen for the life he wanted me to see. I thought of my son sleeping peacefully, trusting the man beside him, oblivious to the shadow now cast over our home. My heart broke in a way I didn't know was possible. He hadn't just hidden who he was, he had hidden why. And now I had to face it. The more I dug, the clearer it became that my husband's past wasn't just hidden, it had been carefully buried. Not erased exactly, but buried in a way that made it nearly invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. The teacher explained it in pieces, like she was trying to prepare me for a truth I wasn't ready to hear all at once. Years ago, he had volunteered for youth programs, big, reputable ones, programs with good intentions, full of adults who wanted to make a difference. But something always went wrong. Not scandals with headlines, not convictions that would follow him forever. Just investigations, quiet, closed-door inquiries that never went public, files that vanished, reports that disappeared when parents asked questions, programs shut down suddenly, leaving staff and volunteers scrambling. And he always moved on. Name changed, location changed, new story, clean slate. I imagined the pattern forming, decades long. How many towns, how many neighborhoods, how many families unknowingly invited him in, and how carefully he'd curated the appearance of normalcy each time, volunteering, helping, building trust. It wasn't courage, it wasn't generosity, it was camouflage. She described the details she remembered from her old notes, complaints brushed aside, children who had been uneasy, parents who trusted him because he smiled in the right way. Nothing prosecutable, nothing concrete, only the fear lingering like smoke. It's terrifying, she said, because no one ever connects the dots until it's too late, and even when they do, he's gone before anyone can act. I felt bile rising as the words sank in. He'd been running this pattern for years, carefully, strategically, escaping consequences not because of luck, but because the system wasn't built to catch someone like him. Schools trusted volunteers, parents trusted families, and law enforcement couldn't act on vague reports, old suspicions, or behavioral patterns alone. He had exploited trust, time, and human kindness to his advantage. I thought of every quiet school hallway, every field trip, every time I'd praised him for being helpful. I thought of my son's classroom, the one teacher I trusted completely, and the student no one seemed to notice. I realized that we had been pieces in a life meticulously designed to look ordinary. My husband had survived scrutiny before, not because he was innocent, but because the system failed to see what was happening until years later. The sickening clarity hit me. I hadn't married a man. I had married someone who had been studying families for decades, learning how to embed himself seamlessly, learning which children were vulnerable, which parents would never question. Every compliment I had ever given him, every proud look, every invitation to help, every moment I had relaxed, it had been an unknowing part of his cover. And the terrifying part? He was still here, still present, still invisible to the world because no one had reason to look closely at the man who smiled, helped, and loved. I pressed my face into my hands, shivering. A system had failed, and I realized I was living with the result. It hit me slowly at first, then all at once. I hadn't just married a man. I had become an unknowing participant in a life he'd carefully constructed. My presence, my trust, my love, they were tools, shields, and proof that he was the man everyone thought he was. I thought about our life from the outside in. To the world, he was the devoted husband, the doting father, the man who attended every school event, who smiled at neighbors, who made sure our son never lacked anything. My own pride in him had unwittingly helped him maintain the perfect public image, and I had helped him do it. Every compliment I gave him, every story I shared about his generosity, every photo I posted or smiled at during parent events, it was all confirmation to anyone looking that he was harmless, that he belonged, that he was trustworthy. My stomach churned as I remembered conversations I had held with friends, neighbors, even teachers. How many times had I vouched for him without a second thought? How many times had my word, my support, my presence served as an invisible stamp of approval? I was his unintentional alibi. My face, my reputation, my family, all pieces of the mask he wore in public. and the realization burned in me like acid. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted him to hear the weight of every second I had unknowingly enabled him. But the worst part? I couldn't. He hadn't done anything outwardly wrong in my eyes, not yet. He had just carefully orchestrated a life that would shield him, using me as the proof that he was safe, ordinary, untouchable. The betrayal didn't feel like words or actions. It felt like the bones of my life shifting beneath me, rearranging themselves into a version I had never agreed to live. Every hug, every kiss, every good morning now carried a hollow echo, as if each had been part of a performance I didn't know I was in. I pressed my palms to my face, heart hammering. I had been the alibi, and the realization was suffocating. She called again later that morning. Her voice trembled even though she was trying to sound calm. "I'm worried about your son," she said, cutting straight to the point. "He's nothing like the troubled student I mentioned before, but he's around the wrong person, and you need to be careful." My stomach dropped. Every protective instinct I had, every lesson about vigilance, every bedtime story about being careful suddenly felt painfully inadequate. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice smaller than I expected. "You need to observe quietly," she urged. "Don't confront him yet. Don't make sudden moves. He's careful. He's aware. If he senses suspicion, the evidence you need could vanish before you even realize it." Evidence. The word felt like a hammer striking my chest. She told me that everything she'd saved, notes, photos, emails, wasn't secure forever. Files could be deleted, accounts wiped, memories twisted if the wrong people were questioned. Time was against me, and every delay gave him more control. "You have to act deliberately, but act before it's too late. Not for revenge, not yet, but for your son's safety. Watch, record, remember, and don't let him know you suspect anything." I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. The dread she had carried for years, the fear that had forced her to call me in the middle of the night, now belonged to me. Her warning didn't come with instructions. It came with urgency, a countdown I couldn't ignore. I nodded to myself, though she couldn't see me. I would protect my son. I would gather what I needed. I would be careful. But the clock was ticking, and every second I hesitated, the house I had once trusted was becoming more dangerous than I ever imagined. I forced myself into the kitchen as if nothing had changed. The smell of coffee brewing and toast in the oven should have been comforting, but my stomach was a tight knot of fear. He was already there, flipping pancakes like he did every Saturday, humming a tune I used to find charming. Now it sounded calculated. "Morning," he said, smiling at me. I returned the greeting with the practiced warmth of someone who has memorized how to appear unshakable. Every word I spoke felt rehearsed, every movement measured. I poured my coffee slowly, stirred it mechanically, all while my mind raced through every conversation I'd ever had with him, searching for the cracks I might exploit. He asked about my night, and I lied smoothly, mentioning restless sleep without revealing anything. His eyes lingered on me for just a fraction too long, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Panic had to remain silent. I kept the conversation light, asking about errands, about the boys' soccer practice, about trivial things that wouldn't reveal the storm raging inside me. But every laugh, every nod, every casual remark felt hollow. I was acting, performing a version of normal that existed only to protect my son and to buy myself time. Every glance at him reminded me of the teacher's words, the name he used, the student he had targeted, the pattern he had repeated. And now he was in our home, right here, and I couldn't show suspicion, couldn't betray the knowledge I carried like a weapon beneath my chest. I tried to focus on the pancakes, the steam curling in the morning light, but my mind wouldn't stay on harmless things. I noticed the way he carefully placed syrup on his son's plate, the way he ruffled his hair, the way he smiled at me, just enough to make me doubt myself. Doubt. That was part of the danger. If I hesitated, if I showed even a flicker of fear, he would notice. He had always been observant, calculated. I had to appear ordinary, loving, devoted, the very image of the family he relied on as camouflage. I smiled at my son when he asked for extra syrup. I laughed at a joke my husband made, every gesture a careful mask. But inside, I was screaming. Every second of this charade sharpened my awareness, made me see the house differently, see him differently, see myself differently. Breakfast ended without incident. Plates cleared, coffee finished, the world seemingly normal. But beneath it all, I knew the danger hadn't passed. Acting normal while panicking was exhausting, terrifying, and it had to continue, at least until I understood the full scope of what I was facing. And the thought that every day could bring another calculated step from him made my pulse pound like a warning drum. It happened in the afternoon while we were folding laundry together. My son was humming, tossing socks into the basket, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. I was trying to maintain calm, to keep every thought in check, when he said something so small, so innocent, that it hit me like a hammer. "Mom," he said, his voice casual, "Mr. Taylor told me I should stay after school today. He said he wanted to help me with stuff I'm not supposed to tell anyone." I froze mid-fold, my hands gripping the towel so tightly I thought I might tear it. "Stuff you're not supposed to tell anyone?" I repeated, careful not to panic. My voice had to be casual, calm, nothing that would scare him. He shrugged, smiling like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Yeah," he said, "some things are easier if you don't tell anyone. He likes helping when no one else is around." My pulse accelerated, and I felt a rush of maternal instinct override the fear that had been freezing me for weeks. The teacher's warning flooded back, her fear for my son, the pattern, the careful watch she had kept. And now, here it was, in my own home, in my own child's words. Confirmation without accusation, proof without confrontation. I swallowed hard. "That's interesting," I said, keeping my tone light. I needed him to feel safe, to keep talking, to reveal just enough without realizing the implications. He bounced a little on his feet, oblivious. "He says I have potential, that I can do more if I try, and he'll help me." The simplicity of it, the trust my son placed in this man made my chest ache. I wanted to grab him and hold him forever. I wanted to shake my husband until he admitted the truth. But the risk was real, too real. I took a deep breath and let my son chatter on, nodding and smiling, while in my mind I made a decision I hadn't dared to make before. I couldn't wait for evidence to pile up, couldn't wait for the right moment to appear magically. The moment was now. My son's innocence, his trust, had become my trigger. I felt my fear sharpen into resolve. No more hesitation. I would watch, I would record, I would protect him, and I would do it without alerting the man who had built his life on my silence. For the first time in weeks, panic was replaced with purpose. I didn't confront him that night, or the next morning. I did something far more dangerous. I planned. Fear had taught me one thing: direct questions would only teach him how to lie better. If there was a crack in his mask, I needed him to reveal it himself. So I created a reason, something ordinary, something he wouldn't suspect. At dinner, I mentioned the school casually, too casually. I said the teacher had emailed about after-school tutoring programs and asked if he thought our son needed extra help. I kept my eyes on my plate, my tone light, uninterested. He froze for half a second. It was subtle. Anyone else would have missed it. A pause just long enough for his fork to hover in midair before continuing its path. Then he smiled. "That's good," he said. "Extra support never hurts." I nodded, pretending to agree, while my heart started pounding. He was careful now, more careful than usual. Later, when our son was out of the room, I pushed a little more. "I thought maybe I'd talk to the teacher directly," I said. "She seems thorough." His jaw tightened, just barely. "Schools can be dramatic," he replied. "They overreact sometimes. Best not to make things complicated." There it was. The slip wasn't in what he said. It was in how quickly he said it, how prepared the response felt, like he'd rehearsed that exact line long before I ever asked the question. I watched him closely after that, his movements, his tone, the way his eyes followed my son when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he positioned himself in doorways, always aware of who was nearby. That night, I mentioned, casually, that I might stay late at work the next day, just to see what he'd do. His reaction came too fast. "I can pick him up," he said. "No problem." "No, it's fine," I replied. "I'll manage." He smiled again, but this one didn't reach his eyes. "You've been tired lately," he said. Let me help. Help. The word echoed in my head like a warning bell. I realized then that the trap wasn't something elaborate. It was proximity, observation, letting him believe he was still in control while I quietly narrowed the space he could move in without being seen. Before bed, I said one last thing. Oh, his teacher asked if you'd be interested in helping with tutoring again. He looked up sharply, too sharp. Did she? He asked. Yes, I said, meeting his eyes for the first time all evening. She said you're very memorable. The silence stretched. Then he laughed, light, polite, almost convincing. Well, I do try. But his hand was shaking, just slightly. And in that moment, I knew I'd found the crack. Not proof, not yet, but the place where the truth was already leaking through. I didn't rush after that. I let the crack widen on its own. 2 nights later, while he was in the shower, his phone lit up on the nightstand. I hadn't planned to look. I hadn't even moved toward it. But then I saw the name on the screen. M. Just one letter. No contact photo, no last name. My hands went cold as I picked it up. The message preview was short. Did she say anything? That was it. No greeting, no context, just assumption. I unlocked the phone with a familiarity that now felt obscene. The thread opened easily like it had been waiting, and suddenly everything aligned. Names I'd seen buried in old accounts, dates that overlapped too perfectly to be coincidences, locations that matched the gaps in his timeline, photos sent years apart, cropped carefully but unmistakably the same man, the same posture, the same watch on his wrist, the same smile he wore at our dinner table. And the name, Marcus. Not just a nickname, not an accident, a fully formed second life. Conversations about schools, about moving on, about being more careful this time. One message made my breath stop completely. Families are the safest cover. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room spinning, the sound of the shower pounding in my ears like a countdown. Every excuse I'd ever made for him collapsed at once. There was no alternate explanation left to cling to, no misunderstanding, no coincidence large enough to explain this away. I thought of my son, his small voice, his trust. I felt something inside me harden. When my husband came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, humming softly, I looked at him and saw only a stranger wearing my husband's face. He smiled when he saw me, unaware that the life he'd built on careful deception had finally run out of places to hide. "What's wrong?" he asked. I held up the phone. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he did what I'd seen him do 1,000 times before. He tried to control the narrative. "It's not what you think," he started. "No," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "It's exactly what I think." He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. The mask had collapsed completely now. There was no script left, no charm to deploy, just a man caught between 2 identities, both exposed. That was the point of no return. Because once you see the truth clearly, once the names, the dates, the faces align, there is no going back to the comfort of doubt. And I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done. I waited until our son was asleep. I didn't want him hearing, didn't want to scare him, didn't want to give my husband any advantage. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it would amplify even the smallest sound. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm into the room. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table, phone in hand, evidence laid bare, and simply looked at him. He noticed the calm before the storm, the way my eyes didn't waver, the way my hands didn't tremble, and I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened, the fraction of hesitation before he tried to smile. "It doesn't have to be like this," he said softly, leaning back in his chair. "You don't understand everything. I can explain." I didn't interrupt. I let him fill the space, because the more he spoke, the more the cracks in his words would show. "You think you've caught me," he continued, voice low, persuasive, "but this is all a misunderstanding. That name, those emails, they don't mean anything. It's old, irrelevant. I changed things because I needed a fresh start, for us, for the family. Everything I've done here with you, with our son, it's real. It's love. Don't let the past destroy what we have now." His words were smooth, rehearsed, but my mind filtered them like a detective reading a suspect's confession. Every attempt to reframe the truth, every appeal to emotion, only highlighted the manipulation he had used for years. "I see what you're doing," I said, quietly, deliberately. My calm made him tense further. "You think you can reframe decades of deception with a story about starting fresh. You think I'll believe that all of those names, all of those gaps, all of those patterns, just coincidence?" He hesitated. For the first time in years, I saw the uncertainty flicker in his eyes. His mask, polished over so many careful interactions, wavered. "I've made mistakes," he said, a slight edge creeping into his voice, "but you're blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing it out of proportion?" I echoed, tone measured, like I was labeling an equation that had already proven itself. "You created a second identity. You built relationships under that identity. You manipulated people, institutions, and yes, me, my trust, so that no one would ever question you. And now you expect me to treat it like a mistake?" He tried to speak again, to charm, to rationalize, but I cut him off by holding up the phone. "Look at this. Names, dates, photos, deleted accounts, messages referencing families you studied. You weren't living, you were performing, and I've lived with the consequences, every day, every hour, without knowing." His face paled. He tried to take the phone, but I held it firmly, not threatening, just factual. The psychological leverage had shifted. "You taught me to trust," I said, low but steady. "You used that trust to shield yourself from scrutiny for years, and now you're trying to gaslight me into thinking it was for love. But love doesn't hide behind manipulation. Love doesn't have two names. Love doesn't need an alibi." The kitchen felt impossibly small, the weight of years of lies pressing down, suffocating. He tried to speak again, to pivot, but there was nothing left to pivot to. I had stripped away the theatrics, the rehearsed charm, the smile he used as armor. I didn't scream, I didn't yell, I didn't demand confessions or explanations. I simply named the truth, stated it clearly, exposed the pattern, held him accountable with facts, observation, and my unwavering presence. For the first time, I saw the man behind the mask, unarmed, cornered, and unable to manipulate the story. And in that silence, the power shifted, not with force, not with violence, but with clarity. The years of deception had met their first unflinching witness. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was awake. I didn't wait for words. I didn't wait for promises. I knew that nothing he could say would undo what I had uncovered. My son's safety was no longer negotiable. Every instinct in me screamed that I needed to act, quietly but decisively, before another day, another moment passed. I packed a small bag while he slept, careful not to wake him. Clothes, essentials, my son's favorite toys, everything that mattered to him, everything that anchored him. I left our shared bedroom without a sound. The house smelled like coffee and pancakes, like the life we had built, and that normalcy made the act feel both surreal and necessary. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave explanations. I didn't call friends or relatives. Drama would have given him leverage, attention, a chance to manipulate. This was not about confrontation. It was about protection. My son's trust and innocence had to be preserved above all else. The quiet of the early morning was a shield. I carried him to the car, buckled him in, and whispered that we were going on an adventure. He smiled sleepily, unaware that this adventure was a line drawn in the sand, a boundary I was claiming for him and for myself. Driving away, the street still empty, I felt the weight lift slightly, like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Empowerment wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was calm, methodical, deliberate. I was reclaiming control of our lives, our safety, step by step, mile by mile. I glanced at my son in the rearview mirror. His face was peaceful, trusting, innocent, and that was enough. I didn't need answers right now. I didn't need explanations. I didn't need to see him punished to know that I was doing what mattered. I made a silent promise. No matter what came next, he would not be endangered, manipulated, or used as a tool of deception again. I had chosen him over everything else, over the love I had thought I knew, over the life I had tried to maintain. And in that quiet, decisive moment, I realized something profound. Protection was more powerful than explanation. Love without safety was meaningless, and leaving without drama was not weakness, it was courage, unseen but unshakable. We drove on into the early morning, leaving behind the house, the lies, and the man I had once called my husband. The life I had known had ended. A new one, built entirely around my son, had begun. Weeks have passed since I left, but the echoes of that life never fully fade. I answer every call now, every message, every unexpected ring with a vigilance I never had before. Because one missed alert could mean consequences too severe to imagine. One day of inattention could undo all the careful steps I've taken to protect my son. I think often of the teacher who called me in the middle of the night, her voice trembling with fear, her courage giving me the edge I needed. I have tried to thank her, not just for saving my son, but for showing me the weight of paying attention. Her bravery reminded me that ordinary moments, quiet vigilance, and small acts of observation can be the difference between safety and disaster. I've learned to trust my instincts more than appearances, to notice details that once seemed inconsequential, to question patterns, names, inconsistencies that might have once seemed harmless, because deception hides in plain sight, behind smiles, routines, and the carefully curated image of normalcy. Sometimes, in the quiet of our new home, I watch my son sleep and feel both relief and lingering unease. The world seems ordinary, peaceful, but the memory of what could have been, of what I almost missed, lingers like a shadow across my mind. I've learned that danger doesn't always shout. It whispers, it smiles, it sits beside you at the breakfast table pretending to be ordinary while you believe you know it fully. I answer calls now because I cannot afford to be blind again, because I know what silence can hide, what lies can flourish under the guise of routine, and because vigilance is the only armor left that can protect what truly matters. Even as I type these words, I feel the chill of realization settle in. Truth is not always dramatic. It often hides in ordinary moments. A paused step, a flicker of hesitation, a casual comment from a child. And when you see it, you cannot unsee it. I no longer ignore the small signals, no matter how trivial they appear. I answer every call, I notice every glance, I observe the ordinary, because that is where extraordinary danger often sleeps. And sometimes in the quiet, I can almost hear the echo of that midnight call, the warning that changed everything. I shiver, not from fear, but from understanding. The world is safer only when we choose to see it clearly, and vigilance is a weight I will carry forever. Because some truths never leave you. They linger, waiting, watching, quiet, ordinary, unstoppable.